Welcome to the Americans for Democratic Action podcast, Insights, with National Chair Andy Thorburn. In this episode, we interview Ezra Levin, the influential co-founder and co-executive director of Indivisible. And now, Andy Thorburn.
Hi, I'm Andy Thorburn. Welcome to Insights. My guest today is Ezra Levin. Ezra is the CEO of Indivisible and most recently the leading organizer of the No Kings rallies. First of all, Ezra, thanks for being with us today.
Hey, thanks. And I will just correct, I'm co-executive director with my spouse, Leah, who does really most of the heavy lifting.
Oh, a true partnership.
Yeah.
It's always good to have someone that does the hard work, Ezra. Congratulations.
It makes it easier on me.
That's for sure. And we're going to talk about Indivisible a little bit later, but I kind of like to do this backwards.
Yeah.
And start with the No Kings rally because it's so recent. So maybe you can tell us, your evaluation of it. How big was the participation and how did you meet your goals? So give us a little bit of how you look at the No Kings Day. Did you really think it served its purpose?
Yeah, so No King's Day was June 14th, Flag Day, a Saturday, happened to be Donald Trump's 79th birthday, the day of his military parade that he threw for himself in D.C. There were 2,169 protests on that day across 27 countries. We were in every congressional district in the country, red states, blue states, purple states, rural areas, suburban areas, urban areas. And the conservative estimates have us at between 5 to 6 million people out at those events, which makes it one of the largest protests in American history. I feel good about that. I feel good that a lot of people came out. I feel good that Donald Trump looked like the weak, lame duck, unpopular president that he is with his military parade in D.C. rather than a strong autocrat solidifying control over our country's government. And also, we should be real. A protest, regardless of how successful on an individual day, is a tactic. It's a tactic that should fit into a broader strategy. And I believe we're not up against just a narrative battle here. We're up against an autocratic breakthrough moment, which requires not one day of having a historic number of people out, but actually a sustained engagement of millions of people on the ground, wherever they are organizing in defense of our democracy. So part of the way I judge the success of No King's Day is how big it was. That's great. It was successful on that
Right.
On that measure, but the true success of No King's Day will not be in how big it was or how much press folks got. It will be in how many people who were never protesting before protested on that day and then got funneled in successfully to their local organizing work. Happy to say we're doing the first of our follow-up trainings today, Wednesday, July 16th. And we have 130,000 people registered on the print to learn about the principles of strategic noncompliance. So it's looking positive for the success on that measure as well.
Well, the follow-up is certainly the critical piece, of course,
Yeah.
but I do have to make a point going back to the actual day itself. I don't remember in the coverage that I saw the comment that there was a demonstration in every single congressional district. That's an impressive feat.
The spread of the protests, in addition to the size of the protests, were really encouraging. We were in New York, yes, we were in Chicago, yes, we were in San Francisco and in Austin and the big city centers, but we were in small towns. There were 17 events in Alaska, I believe. There were 14 in Montana. There was one on every island in Hawaii, including 2 on the Big Island. I mean, this was a protest day where Americans of all stripes, many of whom did not come out before, decided to come out because it's hard to construct a bigger umbrella for more Americans than we don't do kings in this country.
Well, I was going to ask you what triggered that would be the particular theme. I mean, there was a lot of editorials and op-eds about we don't have kings in this country, but what caused you to think that was the right organizing principle?
A couple things. One, we have a basic political cosmology that we adopted as soon as Trump won the election, which was this is not just some typical right-wing government. This isn't a replay of Reagan or George W. Bush or even if Trump won. That what we were facing here is actually worse than simply cuts to billionaires' taxes and cuts to our services. It is a threat to our democratic institutions themselves. And because of that, our orientation since the election has been we need to mobilize people in defense of our democracy, in opposition to a would-be autocrat. And this orientation comes from our own analysis of
Right.
what this
Sure.
guy stands for, but it also flows from the experts in authoritarianism who have been ringing the alarm bells now for quite some time. I'm thinking Maria Stephan, who helped with us to put together this 1 Million Rising training that's kicking off today. Erica Chenoweth of 3.5% fame. She's going to be joining our call tomorrow on the number of people you need to mobilize in order to push back against authoritarianism. And some of the more popular historians like Heather Cox Richardson and Timothy Snyder, who look at the moment we're in and say, we're in the thick of it. They're playing for keeps, and the only thing known to push back successfully against an autocratic breakthrough moment in history is broad-based, ideologically diverse, massive, peaceful, people-powered protest. And
Well,
so no
it,
Kings as a rallying cry for that
right.
is an attempt to build a large coalition of people who do not agree on everything, to be clear. They will
Right.
not agree on what 2029 Democratic trifecta agenda ought to look like necessarily, but we can agree no to this. And that was really important.
It is. I think that's a very good way to look at it because I think that the circles that people I talk to, all the circles that I move in, very often run into a lack of the sense of the genuine urgency of the moment. A lot of people are still thinking of it as a disagreement over policy, like this
Yeah,
is a bad policy. And my
right.
position has been for quite a while that when you're talking about Trump and Trumpism, it isn't about policy. It's exactly about what you're talking about, the urgency of the moment. And as I understand, you feel that No King's Day and these kind of protests is the one of the best ways to create that urgency.
It's a great tactic and an overall strategy to defend American democracy. And the other thing I would say about it, part of it came from our political cosmology, but the reason why it took off was we didn't cook that up in some back office in Washington, D.C. We saw the No King signs organically showing up in protests well before June 14th. They were in the streets. We saw them at May Day events on May 1st. We saw them at hands-off events on April 5th. We saw them at town hall events and empty chair town hall events in February and March. So we didn't just have some marketing firm give us a list of options and we picked the one that we liked the most. This was something that came from the streets and we amplified it. I think that's got to be an important part of the strategy moving forward. This is not going to be a top-down effort that wins. It's got to feed off of natural, real organic energy from the ground up.
Very, very organic. I think that's true. But you already mentioned this. Let's spend a little bit more time on what you said was the key point is not the day itself, it's the follow-up to that. So tell us more about what you have planned to follow up on No King's Day.
So we've launched this training program. It's a three-part training program focused on strategic noncompliance. And this comes out of the uh, uh, research and experience of folks pushing back against authoritarian overreach around the world. And Indivisible started as a guide to how you push your member of Congress to actually work against the Trump agenda or how you replace your member of Congress. And it was rooted in this idea that constituents have power. You, by virtue of being a resident of America, you've got a member of Congress. You've got a couple senators. And the good thing about those representatives and senators is they have to go to you to get votes to hold on to power. That's great. That's great that that's a feature of their professional lives. They have to care what you think. They have to care what their communities think. And so you as a constituent, as an individual, you have very little power. If you're unless you're rich or very famous, you have very little power. But as an organized group of constituents, you can actually influence the behavior of members of Congress. And that basic conception of constituent power drove a lot of what we did in 2017, fighting against the Affordable Care Act repeal, in 2018 to build the blue wave. As we move forward over the next several years, that idea of constituent power was central. I think it's still very important. We should engage in elections like the Wisconsin Supreme Court election, or we still should engage in the upcoming funding fight that is coming in, and we should push our members of Congress. But in a moment of autocratic breakthrough, it's insufficient. It is not enough just to rely on your identity as a constituent with an elected official. You should be looking at the institutions that are under threat by this would-be autocrat. And that's not just Congress, and it's not just the courts. It's media institutions, it's businesses, it's law firms, it's universities. And we should be thinking about how can I, using my identity as a member of a faith tradition, as an alum of a university, as a
Mm.
consumer who can choose to go to or not go to a business, how can I use that identity in a collective way to support those institutions that are pushing back against autocratic overreach and to provide some countervailing force against those who are being bullied by this administration?
Yeah, I'd like to circle back to that a little bit later because I think what you're talking about is the problem isn't really Trump. It's really Trumpism. It's really what he stands for and the kind of crazy coalition that he's been able to build. And what do we do
Yeah.
about all that? So let's circle back to that. But I would like to stop for a second and give you a chance to tell a little bit about your own personal background, how you became a political activist. There's certain triggering moments that you remember from as you were growing up. So how did you get to this point of being a political activist on the front lines of this battle?
Sure. So I grew up in the boonies in Texas. My dad was a musician. My mom didn't work, but then went back to school and became a social worker. But we were low income growing up. We were on had some public benefits. We were not insured. My mom had a terrible medical disaster. She's okay now. Is that just to not make it a terrible story? But her life was saved by a doctor. The insurance system was awful and had to sue the doctor to avoid bankruptcy. It was a whole mess. And I think that was the start of me becoming more politically engaged. My parents had opinions, but were not politically involved. So I studied political science and economics and poverty policy in college. Went and focused on poverty policy in AmeriCorps right after college, focusing on housing and homelessness issues. And that was rewarding, but ultimately felt like we didn't have the tools at our disposal to solve the problems at the local level. So I started looking to how I could engage at the national level, went and found an entry-level job in Congress working for Lloyd Doggett and joined the week that Lehman Brothers failed in September 2008. And then suddenly Barack Obama was president, and we had majorities in the House and the Senate, and it gave me this unrealistic expectation for what Congress can do. It was a heady time to be a junior staffer in Congress working on things like the Affordable Care Act and Dodd-Frank and the stimulus. But after the Tea Party got going and defeated us in 2010 and we lost the majority, um, I I decided, I really want to become an expert on poverty policy. I want to know how I can actually push forward on that set of that agenda. Went to grad school, came back, and worked as an anti-poverty advocate for several years. And I found that meaningful. I found it intellectually stimulating. I found it rewarding. But ultimately, the issue that I came up against was the problem with our political system was not that we didn't know how to solve inequality. It's not that we didn't know how to solve poverty. It's not a hard issue to solve. People just need more money. The
Right,
rich need to be
exactly,
less rich.
right,
It's not that
right,
complicated.
right.
I can write a lot of papers on this. I can create fun policy ideas and advocate for it. But the real problem was that our political system was not set up to respond to the will of the people.
If I could stop you for a second, Ezra, I just want to, the point you make about that is very interesting because whenever I hear about the Social Security problem, I want to say, you understand the problem is simply that you don't bring enough money into the system to pay benefits. Stop trying to cut the benefit side. And why don't you look at the revenue side and bring more money in? And I think that's the point you're making in general about our system.
That's right. Look, I don't think the problems that we have to solve are very hard. I think that we have an early, flawed version of democracy that is not set up to respond to the will of the people. And so I became more interested in how can you build the political will that will produce the policies that create a more equitable and just society, rather than working later in the process, as I was, on what is the policy report I can create and what's the coalition I can build at the end of the process. I think our democracy is just not set up to work. It responds to the wealthy. It responds to concentrated interest. It doesn't respond to people. And when Donald Trump won in 2016, I was working in the anti-poverty space, looking to understand how we could push back. And I was shocked at the establishment's response, both on the Democratic side and the Republican side. The Republican side was talking about the Japanese internment camps during World War II as a model for what to do with Muslims and immigrants and refugees, which is uh, atrocious. And the response on the Democratic side, I'll never forget it. There was an interview with incoming Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer in which he said, well, we lost. That's what happens. We're just going to have to work with Trump, and maybe we can work on infrastructure together. And so there was this very real near-term future as of the end of 2016 in which, America's future was going to be one where the roads to our new internment camps were well paved with bipartisan dollars. And I had experienced the Tea Party. I had seen a minority in Congress mobilize a grassroots constituency to push against the majority. And just saying no to at that time, a popular president. And that's why we wrote the original Indivisible guide. It was not anything more than a guide to how you can organize yourself to push your member of Congress against the Trump administration, inspired to a large extent by our experiences seeing the Tea Party itself organize.
Well, let's dig into this point a little bit more because you mentioned in passing the Lehman Brothers Monday that they
Yeah.
announced that they were going out of business. Um, and I wanted to use that as an example of the points you've just made because how much of our problems do you think have at least some origin story in the Democratic response or lack of response to that serious recession? They responded well on the financial side. They
Yeah.
didn't respond very well on the accountability side. So I wonder if you think that that's one of the factors that fed into the discontent that helped fuel Trumpism.
I think there is a widespread belief that our political system is not working for normal Americans. And that belief in general about the current state of politics does not just apply to the United States of America. It applies to most industrialized democracies in this moment. If you look at, there was a great Financial Times analysis of shortly after the 2024 election, looking at not just the American election, but all of the elections that were held in 2024 across all industrialized democracies. And for the first time in the history of the data set that they had going back 100 plus years, every single ruling party in 2024, doesn't matter the geography, regardless of how long the ruling party had been in office, regardless of the ideology of the ruling party. If you were holding elections in Slovenia, Slovakia, France, South Korea, you lost power in 2024. There was a global backlash against the establishment because there is a widespread sense that our current systems are not actually working for people. And so I think there are a lot of people out in the country who voted for Trump because, damn it, I want lower prices of bread and eggs. I want to be able to buy a house. I want to be able to get a job that pays well and respects me. And I'm being offered the status quo right now. And sure, maybe I'm not wild about Trump, but I don't want more of the same. I don't think this is just about 2024, to your point. I think this goes back to a real uh, a real lack of innovative ideas from the Democratic side of the aisle to update their thinking for how they can actually build a winning coalition. The dominant frame in Democratic politics for how you build a winning coalition is adopt as many Republican ideas as you can to prove that you're not too far progressive or to the left, because that's how you win a moderate. And I don't think that reflects the interests of a majority of the American public. They are willing to endorse big ideas. They are willing to rally around a party with vision, and they're not looking for somebody to endorse bipartisanship for the sake of bipartisanship. And I do think that that does flow back not just to the Obama years, but to long before. We've been fighting this fight basically since the Reagan Revolution. Having a Democratic Party that thinks that its path to victory is proving that they can be a little Reagan too. They can be a little George W. Bush too.
Well, I think this is an important point. I agree with that completely. We have to be very careful, particularly with the Trump phenomena. Many people will offer an explanation. Trumpism is because of X. And I think we have to be careful to understand there's many things that have contributed to where we are now. There isn't one event or one idea. It's a long-term project in which certain conservative forces have been able to direct the country in a way that is not for the best interests of working families and for the rest of us. So I don't mean to imply, and I agree with you, there isn't any one explanation. But obviously, Indivisible, you think, is a big part of the answer. And you talked a little bit about it. But what's its status right now? What is it? Where's Indivisible going at this moment? How many chapters do you have? What's your goal? How do you operate? And where are you going to take Indivisible in the next couple of years?
Yeah, well, I mean, Indivisible, to be clear, Indivisible is both a movement and it's a national organization. So we've got Indivisible, the movement, which is made up of 2,500 local Indivisible chapters in, I think it's every congressional district save four or five. So we're everywhere in many congressional districts. There are more than one.
Right.
And these are volunteer-led chapters of Indivisible. They're started by somebody who looked around and said, gosh, things are terrible. We need to get engaged. What do I do? I guess I'll start an Indivisible group. And they have somewhere between, dozens and hundreds and thousands of people, depending on the Indivisible group, and they determine where they go. So Indivisible National, the national organization that I co-lead with Leah, my spouse, we have campaign strategies. We take on big efforts like pushing back against the reconciliation bill recently, or pushing back against the Affordable Care Act repeal in 2017. And we provide tools and strategic advice and trainings and messaging support and grassroots organizing support for these groups. But at the end of the day, any one of these indivisible groups can say, yeah, but I'm not going to focus on that right now. We're going to do this municipal election, or we're really working on this mutual aid project, or we've got this idea for long-term power building and we're engaging that way. And that's great. That's by design, that I am not leading this movement and it's not command and control. We are supporting this movement to build power everywhere. And when I say build power, I mean a pretty technical term of building power. Power being the ability to get someone or some institution to do something they wouldn't otherwise do. That's what we look to
Right.
build.
Right.
And we do that with this idea that in a democratic republic, you build power by organizing your community where you are. So I want Hope, Arkansas to be organizing Hope, Arkansas, and I want Butte, Texas to be organizing Butte, Texas, and I want San Francisco to be organizing San Francisco. And from that, good things flow. Some things you can predict and some things you can't predict. But without that, you don't have power. You can't change the behavior of your leaders or your institutions. So where does Indivisible go next? Indivisible grows. We are in a growth period right now. We've doubled in size since the election. We have 5 to 10 new Indivisible groups forming in different parts of the country every single day. Our membership has quadrupled since the election. Lots of people are getting involved in pro-democracy work. I think we need more. That's what we know
Sure,
from the
sure.
experts in authoritarianism. We need more people engaged in peaceful, broad-based, geographically dispersed organizing.
Well, one of the points that I've talked about myself, which I think is consistent with what you just said, is that when we think about democracy, we think that the keystone is voting. But the
Mm,
reality is the keystone is civic engagement. It isn't voting
right.
because
That's
because
right.
Russia has elections that you can vote, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it sounds like you're saying a different version of the same thing, that Indivisible is focused on getting people engaged on the issues that are important to them and their community, whatever that means to a local group.
That's right. And the theory is that if you do that locally, it ladders up to the county, to the state, to the Fed. And collectively, then we can influence local events, state events, and national events. And that's not just a high-minded theory. This is what we've experienced when we're at our best. The top legislative priority of the first Trump administration in 2017 was repealing the Affordable Care Act. The conventional wisdom in Washington, D.C., circa December 2016 was it's dead, it's over, don't engage, whatever. They got the votes, it's his top priority, he's going to do it. It was a major campaign. We and others mobilized against it and won. In 2018, we built the largest midterm margins in the history of the Republic. In 2019, we pushed a reluctant Democratic leadership in the House to impeach the guy. In 2020, we made him the first one-term president generation. In 2021, there were two impossible Senate runoffs that we won
Right.
to clinch a Democratic trifecta. In 2022, there was supposed to be an inevitable red wave that did not materialize. In 2023, anti-MAGA forces won in Ohio and Kentucky and Virginia and New Jersey. And then we lost in 2024. And I think the wrong message to take from that 8 years of experience is, well, organizing doesn't work. We shouldn't try. I think we were up against strong headwinds, and what we did was not enough in 2024. But the only solution I know, and as far as I know, the experts in authoritarianism know, to push back against autocratic breakthrough moments is organized peaceful protest. So that's what we're doing.
So the main tactic to defeat this agenda, in your mind, remains organizing, protesting.
I would welcome something easier, Andy, if you know of it, because it's not easy to organize millions of people. And also, I think it's the only thing that will work.
Right. And so that's what you're focused on, continuing to build that local organization. Have you noticed in building the local organization that there's a particular type of individual who becomes a local leader around which a local indivisible chapter can build? Or is it just very diverse personalities? Or is there kind of a model that is the person who's the most effective at this?
So, what I see across the country are people who were not engaged in the political system. These are not long-term politicos. These aren't people who ran for school board before or necessarily served on any finance committees of candidates. These are people who are paying attention, who consume political content look at the agenda that MAGA is bringing and look at the sometimes lackluster response of the elected Democratic establishment and say to themselves, gosh, well, I'm not a quote unquote organizer. I'm not a quote unquote leader, but if nobody else does it, we're not going to have anything. So I guess I'll pull some people together. That story I just described has been replicated thousands upon thousands of times within the Indivisible movement by people from all walks of life. But that is the basic origin story that I normally hear. I think there's a common misconception out there that Leah has a phrase that politics is too important to be left up to the politicians. And so I do think there's a common misconception that, well, they'll take care of it. There are experts who do it, the political consultants or the elected officials or the interest groups or the lobbyists, whoever it is, somebody with expertise will do it. And if there's one thing I hope we achieve, it's to burst that bubble that nobody is coming to save us. Nobody has greater expertise or authority than you as a resident of this country, as a resident of a community. You can actually build and wield power. You can change things. It just takes some work. And the secret is getting numbers. You need to build a community that people
Right.
want to be part of that doesn't just I think there's a lot of work in political organizing that is frankly like make work or kind of BS work. It's sign an online petition to show that you care. That doesn't work. That's not building power. But if my experience is if you create a framework that allows people to actually take on things that they lead, that targets people or institutions that actually can be moved. So it's worth their time. You will see people say, "Oh, wow. I can not just be part of this, but I can be a leader in this and I can own this." And that keeps them involved and it helps them recruit more people. If you Google image search Indivisible logo, you can go do this right now. You'll see Indivisible Nationals logo. Great. You can buy a hat with it on or a shirt. That's fine. Recommended. I've got a few of those. But I think
Okay.
vastly more important than that, scroll down and you will see hundreds of local Indivisible group logos with local flair and varying levels of, our artistic capability, but very real and organic
Right. Right.
groups
Right.
that are owned and operate at the local level. And I just think that's absolutely key to
Well,
build.
I love your comment that nobody's coming to save us. That's really very appropriate for the Trump years because
Yeah.
if you look back over the Trump years, all the way back to
Yes.
2018, how many times did we say, "Oh, when this report comes out, or when this comes out, or when
Yeah.
the Supreme Court rules on this idea of immunity," or how many times have we said there is something that's going to save us and stop this runaway train? And as you pointed out, we only can save ourselves.
Yeah, moderate Republicans are going to save us. The Democratic Party officials are going to save us. Mueller is going to save us. The media is going to save us. People who leave the administration and are whistleblowers are going to save us. The courts are going to save us. The legal system is going to save us. And what we see is one by one, we are left with ourselves. And the good news is there are enough of us. There are more of us, more pro-democracy Americans by far than there are pro-autocracy Americans. It's not close. And we don't need to mobilize a literal majority of the population. This is what we learned from Erica Chenoweth, one of these experts in authoritarianism, looking at hundreds of examples across the world of people organizing to push back against authoritarianism. You need 3.5% of the population, 3.5% persistently organized, pushing back against federal overreach is enough to maintain democracy. That's easy, Andy. That's 11 or 12 million people in the country. We got half of that on hand, on half of that on No King's Day. We continue to build. We just need to build more.
And the fact is that every poll shows that the issues that we would call the progressive democratic issues do have majority support in the country. You can go right down the list, whether it's abortion, access to abortion, or a more fairer taxation system. If you look at it specifically for issues, it comes out well. But when it comes out to mobilizing, then we get overpowered by the media, by wealthy people, by influence that the wealthy group has achieved, and it becomes difficult to make those policies real.
I think it's really, really important to recognize that this guy has very little support for the agenda he is pushing through right now. He won his marginal votes based on a promise to lower prices of eggs and gas and make your life easier. And he has then implemented Project 2025, this proto-fascist agenda
Sure.
to centralize power in his hands and to reward his biggest donors. He doesn't have support for that. He doesn't have a mandate for that. Even on the issue that he is seen to have the greatest strength, immigration, people have rejected him disappearing Americans and depriving them of due process. He doesn't have support of that. People have rejected his militarization of LA. And I think people are about to see through this most recent reconciliation bill that exploded ICE's budget to be the largest federal law enforcement agency in the history of the Republic. They're going to see that what happened in LA was a dress rehearsal for what he's going to do to the rest of the country, and he doesn't have support for that either. That is terrible because he's going to do a lot of damage. There's going to be a lot of lives destroyed by this agenda. But as a political matter, a lot of people who were even in his coalition are going to say, I'm not for this. I want this to stop. And we should welcome them in to our coalition to prevent the damage and destruction.
Well, let's get for the last section here, let's get very concrete about the current moment and upcoming elections. I want to ask you, first of all, about the New York City election, the primary.
Yeah.
It was the case where, a very progressive, so-called Democratic Socialist obviously beat two old-style Democrats. There wasn't a lot of publicity given to the fact that both of the other Democratic candidates were severely handicapped. One, of course, was serious fraud issues, and one was a sexual assault charges that were quite viable. So my question is, is there any lesson in that New York election, or is it just a one-off that was based on the dynamics of New York City in that particular election? Do you see anything there that's has some implications nationally?
So what I would say is I have never seen the chasm between rank and file Democrats and the Democratic establishment that currently exists. We have had our differences with Democratic leaders in the last 8 years. We have fought with them at times, but there's generally been, when I've worked with folks organizing on the ground as part of the Democratic coalition, a recognition that we're generally in the same place and we're all rowing in the same direction. Even in 2017, when we were trying to convince Democrats to fight as hard as they could against the Affordable Care Act repeal, and there were some concerns from Democratic leadership that they didn't want to go as far as we wanted them to go, eventually they got there. They saw the grassroots energy and they got there, and they fought successfully against it. The fracture that I see within the Democratic Party is, I would say, not particularly ideological. I have my own ideological beliefs. I would like to drive us in a more progressive, populist economic agenda position. And I think the dominant cause of the fracture in the party, though, is do you believe we are in a moment of constitutional crisis, or do you believe that this is more or less politics as usual? And this is not just the quote unquote lefties or the progressives versus conservatives. There's actually a somewhat ideologically diverse coalition of folks who do believe this is a crisis and are fighting like it's a crisis, and a somewhat ideologically diverse coalition of folks who think, yeah, this is bad, but we're gonna wall up them in the next midterms and we'll get back power, and that's just how these things go. The pendulum swings one way and the other way. The rank and file Democrats think that this is a crisis, and they're looking for outsiders to challenge the party establishment because they want a party that treats this as a crisis. And those establishments are going to signal, or those challengers are going to signal the fact that they're outsiders, are going to signal the fact that they're serious. In many ways, they're going to do it through aesthetics, they're going to do it through the way they campaign, and they're going to do it through their policy agenda.
Sure.
And I think Mondani did that in spades, was able to make people believe that he was not just yet another Democrat promising to do stuff but wouldn't deliver because he ultimately would come up against the establishment fold. He presented a campaign that you wanted to believe in, that he represented a future that wasn't the sad, old, tired, feckless, corrupt Democratic Party that has failed us up into this point. And so,
Well,
gosh,
sure.
I hope it is a sign of things to come. I
Okay.
hope we see more primary challenges that drive the party in that direction, because I think we got to win. And I think clowns like Cuomo are not going to get us there. They are going to demonstrate to the public that no, the Democratic Party is just as corrupt, is just as driven by the status quo as you've always thought it, and you shouldn't trust them. We need new blood. We need new leadership. We need a new brand at the party to beat the fascists so that we can do good things.
Well, based on all of that, what is your realistic expectations for 26 and 28?
Oh gosh, Andy, that's forever away. Here's what I would say. I
26 may not be that far away, but
It's about 16, a little less than 16 months away. I would say
uh,
we can't wait for 26. That's what I would say. I saw a very common response to the passage of this BBB, this big bad bill. I saw responses from some Democrats saying, "Oh boy, they really did it now. We're gonna just really beat them in the midterms, and we're gonna take back the House." And look, part of me says, "Yeah, this is a terrible bill. We are going to run against it. We are going to defeat some Republicans." But if you believe, as I do, that this is an autocratic breakthrough moment, you are not waiting 16 months to go vote. You are looking at his attacks on law firms and media institutions and universities. You are looking at his threat to fire the Fed, that the leader of the Fed. You are
sure.
looking at the overall orientation of this administration. You are saying we've got to mobilize now. We've got to firm up the support for our democratic institutions. We've got to make clear to our leaders that if they fall in line, there are going to be consequences for them afterwards. And we've got to hold the line now. So, what are my expectations for 2026? My hope is that we organize effectively enough that we have free and fair elections in 2026. I think if we do that, I think we will wipe the floor with MAGA Republicans all across the country. I think we will retake the House and we have a good shot of retaking the Senate if things pan out. That's a stretch goal. I think it's not totally unrealistic. But what is not acceptable for me in 2026 is electing a set of status quo Democrats who on January 3rd, 2027, will take their new leadership positions and say, "Great, we just won. Now let's show how we can work with MAGA to prove that we're serious legislators." I want
But
accountability. I want subpoenas. I want hearings. I want testimonies from those who have committed crimes and violated the Constitution. And I want to lead into 2028, not with the same Democratic Party that we had going into 2024,
well,
one that people can believe.
sure. Well, Ezra, let me ask you though, do you personally have any realistic fears that even if we do a great job in organizing, and even if we get great candidates and we organize properly, do you have a fear that maybe in 26, Trump will use power to make it difficult to have those free and fair elections that we need to push the country back another direction? Do you think that's a legitimate fear?
I don't know how anybody could be paying attention to the conditions in this country now and not have that fear. If you don't have that fear, it says to me that you are living in a cave with your eyes closed and your fingers in your ears. And I would actually bring that fear closer to present day. The Republicans in Texas are currently talking about gerrymandering Texas now ahead of the midterms to squeeze out more Republican seats to avoid losing the House of Representatives in 2026 because they understand the backlash that is coming. That isn't maybe something happens sometime in
Right.
2026 to prevent the public from expressing its will in elections. That's happening right now.
And they're relying on a Supreme Court decision that said that political gerrymandering is okay.
That's right. Well, and it's a Supreme Court that was largely put into place by right wingers who don't believe in representative democracy and want to
Right.
see the rich and the powerful concentrate their wealth and their power further.
Exactly. Well, I think you've kind of addressed this, but I think maybe the way to wrap this up, and I appreciate all your insights and all that all you shared with us today. But there is a kind of a difference between what you might call Trumpism and Trump himself. And from my point of view, Trump does have this kind of evil talent, probably unconscious, that enables him to build a kind of coalition of elements that wouldn't normally coalesce. And so the question I think I'd like to sort of end with is, how do you think we deal with the forces that Trump has unleashed? How do we deal with them when he is off the scene, when he's no longer there? And we have all of these forces of racism, white supremacy, et cetera, that he's unleashed. How do you feel as a country and indivisible? How do you think we deal with that when he's no longer the central figure?
Look, I maybe I'm naive, Andy, but I think there's nothing wrong with this country that can't be solved by the people being more accurately represented in our institutions. The problem with our flaws in democracy is more democracy, from my point of view. And the fundamental problem we have is a democratic system that does not respond to the will of the people. Finland has white nationalist fascists. They organize, they try to win votes. What Finland doesn't do is concentrate political power in a 15% minority and give it power to make laws for 350 million residents. That's bad. We shouldn't do that. We can make reasonable modernizing reforms to our democracy to make it actually deliver for people. We can make DC a state. We can get Puerto Rico self-determination. We can eliminate gerrymander. We can get money out of politics. Like
redo our tax code, maybe. Maybe do have a better tax code.
Well, so what I would say about that is if you reform the democratic system, you're going to get a better tax code. Right. You're going to get a better education system. You're going to get better anti-monopoly legislation. Like all this stuff flows from one central problem, which is our democracy responds to concentrated wealth and concentrated power. That's what it responds to now. And if you want to fix that, you got to fix the democracy. And if you want to fix the democracy, you're up against powerful, wealthy forces. So how do you do it? You organize, Andy. There are more people on our side than there are on the side of the wealthy and the powerful. But if we are disorganized, they win. Simple as that. But if we organize and demand these reforms, we win. It's a pain. It takes time. It takes energy. It means not just being an activist type, but being a normal everyday American who does not think of yourself as an organizer or a leader or an activist, getting involved in your community wherever you are. It could be joining an Indivisible group or a Working Families Party group or Move-On's list or whatever it is. I actually don't particularly care about what local organizing group you join, but if you don't have a local organizing home, you're not part of the solution right now. That's what it's going to take.
Right. Well, first of all, thank you so much for your insights. And I think we leave with a very important message, which is very simple. The answer to most of our problems is organize.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time, Ezra.
Thank you, Andy.
Good luck.
Bye-bye. You can fight back by joining the most experienced progressive organization in U.S. history, Americans for Democratic Action. Go to the website on your screen to learn more. America needs democratic action now more than ever. Thank you.